against future exogenous shocks to have too many of our eggs in a single basket. Now, the Caribbean historically has been placed at a very strategic point in the world. We are midway between North and South America, two huge continents with massive economies. To use the example of Jamaica, as I have fellow Jamaicans here, we can see our proximity to the canals, the Panama Canal, and how we interact with shipping coming from Asia, as Asia becomes more and more an economically dominant region of the world. We have a long history of being a maritime and seafaring people. I will speak personally back to my time when I lived briefly in Barbados 40 years ago. I can speak fondly of my first wife as we remain good friends, but I remember her uncle Wendell, who was a seaman, and I was struck by the lifestyle of seamen, people living away from home months and months at a time. Her own grandfather was a seaman. So on my children's side, their forebears are very much Barbadians who lived on the ocean. So it is something that we in the region have had a long history in. And I suspect that for some time we have taken it a bit for granted as other areas of economic activity have come up and seemed more attractive to our young people. So I think it's now timely to look at these opportunities in shipping and logistics, to get back to, as we say, get back to the roots, to go back to something that we have done for centuries. But now we are realizing again the importance of getting that there. So I want to congratulate all the participants. I want to congratulate the organizers, of course. And we look forward to an enlightening session, an enlightening initiative, but with a view to not just talking about it, but actually getting some things done. We in the Caribbean Employers Confederation will make a pledge that we, in our respective national employers organizations, who are now sitting down in all the different task forces across the region to talk about the post-COVID, post-pandemic economies, we will do our best armed with new information to lobby for the policies that will make this happen. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you so very much, Wayne, and poignant comments, in fact, given the COVID situation, and certainly with respect to maritime industry and maritime students, who it's all about the job. Where are they going to be placed? How are they going to become true partners in transforming and improving the economies of our region? So thank you very much indeed for being here this morning. We now move to, it is my pleasure indeed to introduce the presenter. I have to beg the audience's indulgence, Mr. Rick Sasso, chairman of MSC Cruises USA, unfortunately is unable to be here this morning due to unavoidable circumstances that came up with the company. And he has asked a friend, really, Andrew Coggins, who is my board member, ACMF board member, to fill in for him this morning. A bit about Andrew. He's a native New Yorker. Dr. Andrew Coggins is a clinical professor in the Department of Management and Management Sciences in the Lubin School of Business at Pace University here in New York. He teaches courses in international management and hospitality and tourism management, including cruise industry management. His research areas include all aspects of the cruise industry, with a special interest in the Asian market, hospitality facilities design and management, travel and tourism management. He obtained his BA in politics from New York University. Prior to his arrival at Pace, Dr. Coggins was a professional consultant in the School of Hotel and Tourism Management at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, where he taught courses on travel and tourism, service quality management, hospitality facilities and design, and cruise line management for 6 years. As I said, Andrew serves on the board of the American Caribbean Maritime Foundation, and I had the great honor of working with him the last couple of years. It is my pleasure to introduce him to present to you this morning on Our Future, Our Seas, Caribbean Environmental Issues, Regulations, and Compliance. Andrew?
Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be here and be able to stand in for my good friend, Rick Sasso. Everyone remember the picture on the previous slide. Please move to slide number 3. Thank you, Laurette. Okay, so the picture was setting the stage, who owns the oceans. So why a big fuss over developing an uninhabited island? That island is located in the South China Seas, which is an area of disputed waters. Several nations lay claim to the whole area. And so what is the law regarding the seas? So, next slide, please. Back up. Okay, thank you. Okay, so looking at the seas are divided into several zones. So we have next to country of the land, 3 to 12 miles out from the land is considered territorial seas. There's also a term called contiguous zone that's out at 12 nautical miles. And then we go out to 200 nautical miles from the land, and that's an exclusive economic zone. So the country has control over what's under the sea, for example, oil or gas, and what's in the sea, for example, fisheries. And then we move out into the high seas, and there no one has jurisdiction. And on board the ship, it's the country whose flag the ship flies that has jurisdiction. Next slide, please. So there's a fourth zone, and it's called archipelago status for island nations, where the contiguous zone and 200-mile zone extend out beyond a boundary drawn around the group of islands. So if we go back to the picture in the beginning, several uninhabited islands strategically placed would give that country claim over a large area of the South China Seas. Okay, moving on to the next one. Okay, so the law, international law regarding the seas is enforced by international treaties referred to as conventions. And there are several main intergovernmental organizations. The primary one is International Maritime Organization, IMO. IMO was founded in 1958. They are the custodian of all related international conventions / treaties regarding the seas. They're responsible for the SOLAS, the MARPOL, tonnage measurement, STWC, ISPS code, and their website is located below. Next slide, please. So I will explain further what all the acronyms mean as I go in depth on those areas. Okay, so another organization involved with maritime industry is the International Labor Organization, founded in 1919 under the League of Nations, works with maritime labor problems and working conditions, and their website is listed there. Then we have a International Transport Workers Federation called ITF, and they're a union, and their main concern is with pay, working conditions, and working hours. And again, their website is there. So if we can go on to industry trends, I'll talk a little bit about those. All right, so the regulatory issues involve SOLAS, which is safety of life at sea, MARPOL, which is maritime pollution, the ECA or ECA, which is emissions control area, and ballast management, and international safety management, ISM. Next slide, please. Also, other environmental issues include waste disposal, emissions control, and carbon footprint. And so cruise ships are especially sensitive to the waste control or waste disposal issue. Next slide, please. Okay, so SOLAS, International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, is the formal title, but everyone refers to it as SOLAS. The first convention was, let me back up just one bit on that. SOLAS is written in blood. The regulations in SOLAS are there because hundreds of people died unnecessarily in a foreseeable or preventable incident. So the first SOLAS convention was in 1914, following the sinking of the RMS Titanic. There's been 4 versions of SOLAS since then. The present version dates from 1974 and entered into force in 1980. What I mean by entering force, IMO works with the nations, negotiates the treaty when a certain number of nations has ratified the treaty or the convention goes into force. So the 1974 version went into force in 1980 and has been amended through the years. Next slide, please. Okay, so what does SOLAS look at? One, it applies to all types of ships. It looks at design and stability. It looks at safety of the machinery. It looks at firefighting and fire protection. It looks at life saving, and it looks at the carriage of dangerous goods. Next slide, please. Okay, let's see. All right, so new rules for 1997. Okay, back one slide, please. Okay, back to slide 12, please. Okay, so the SOLAS rules for 1997. They were ship routing systems could be made mandatory and address rules of the road and traffic separation schemes. Next slide, please. Other things involved with the new rules in 1997 were a tightening of the standards of training, certification, and watch keeping. STCW is a normal term, common term for that. So states that issue licenses to seafarers must provide detailed information to the IMO concerning how they administer the standards so that the licensing is legitimate and meets international standards. It also set limits on work hours and requirements that seafarers must be afforded time to rest to prevent fatigue among watch keepers. Because when you're fatigued and you're a watch keeper, you make bad decisions. And it also enhanced the port state control. So by port state, that's the state, the country in which the harbor is located and when the ship is in harbor. It also addressed roll-on, roll-off ferry rules, especially areas of stability and watertight integrity requirements. Again, that was a result of a number of disasters. And it looked to the airline industry to require demonstrated performance standards. So it wasn't just that you could take a test, you now had to demonstrate that you were proficient in that qualification. Next slide, please. So under SOLAS, we also had the International Convention on Oil Pollution Preparedness, Response, and Cooperation of 1990, OPRC. What that required was nations to have measures for dealing with pollution incidents. Again, very important for the Caribbean. Requires ships to have oil pollution emergency plan, to report incidents. So if you spill oil, you got to tell God and country. And you had to drill your emergency response. So you had to have a designated team to clean up any oil spills, and the team had to be drilled on a regular basis to prove they were competent in the job and that you were ready to clean up any oil spills. Next slide, please. Then there was in 1993, the International Safety Management Code. Again, going to sea can be dangerous, and if you have good management, you can have a safer environment at sea. So this code became Chapter 9 of the SOLAS. The purpose was to provide for safe practices, safe working environment in ship operations, establish safeguards against all identified risks, and continuously improve safety management skills of personnel including preparing for emergencies. It had a number of requirements, which was a safety management system for whoever has responsibility for operating the ship. So the companies had to have a safety management system, and it had accountability. So designated safety managers for the company and also safety managers for the ship. A way of complying with that was through ISO, which is a certification that can be earned through inspections and practice. And that's more in European companies and in US companies. Next slide, please. Okay, then safety of navigation was also looked at with SOLAS. And the Convention on the International Regulations for Preventing Collisions at Sea, COLREG, from 1992, has the rules of the road and governs ships' actions when encountering other ships. When I was in the Navy, my brother-in-law always used to tell me, he said, ships are so big, the ocean is so big, how can ships hit each other? I told him it happens. And it looks very easy when you look at it in retrospect. Okay, so below is just a depiction of the rules of the road. So in certain circumstances, ships are required to take certain actions. So if you are driving a ship, you want to know that the guy or the gal on the other bridge knows what to do, and you're both doing what you're supposed to do. Next slide, please. Okay, then under safety and navigation was that a revised Chapter 5 of 2000 recognized that vessel traffic schemes, or VTS as they're commonly called, are appropriate for areas where you have high traffic density, difficult navigation, environmentally sensitive areas, and dangerous cargoes. So we could go back to that slide for a minute. One more slide, please. Okay, yeah. So if you think of vessel traffic schemes, think of it as a motorway or interstate going in and out the harbor. So where do they have it? For example, high traffic density. If you go in and out of Tokyo Bay, you have 3 lanes of traffic going in, 3 lanes of traffic coming out, full of huge ships. If you go by Singapore, again, you have different lanes depending on the direction you're going. Going in and out of New York Harbor, again, you have different lanes depending on your direction. It might be where you have difficult navigation. So again, maybe going through the Straits of Malacca in Southeast Asia, where the navigation can be difficult. Again, vessels going in different directions have to be in different lanes. Environmentally sensitive areas, for example, the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, where there's only certain places the reef can be crossed, and they also require mandatory pilots. And then dangerous cargoes, for example, if you have ships that can explode, they want to be routed very carefully so that no one runs into them and they don't run into anyone else. Next slide, please. Okay, so then there's the International Ship Port Facility Security ISPS code, and again, amendments to SOLAS in 2002. Why do we have that? Direct result of September 11th, 2001. It addressed not just the ships, but also the ports. The aim was to prevent unauthorized access and introduction of unauthorized weapons, incendiary devices, or explosives to the port area or on the ships. It established procedures for setting security levels and raising the alarm. Next slide, please. Okay, so what does it require? It requires that ships have a ship security plan, that the ports have a security plan, that the terminals have a security plan, that the ship has a designated security officer, the shipping company and the terminal companies and the port companies all have designated security officers, again, port security officer, and that the security levels are based on security assessment, and that the responses be drilled, and then the plans be inspected and certified. Next slide, please. Okay, looking at this picture, you can imagine that in the Caribbean. It would be a disaster. So the International Convention for Prevention of Pollution from Ships, 1973/1978, a lot of words, comes down to MARPOL. It was developed as a result of pollution by tankers pumping ballast before entering port and tank cleaning. Ballast is water that's taken on and put in a tank so that the ship rides the proper way when at sea, and when the tanker goes into port, they normally pump it off. And also from tank cleaning, the results of tank cleaning are also pumped overboard. And what really spurred the MARPOL was grounding disasters such as Torrey Canyon in 1967, as depicted below, and Amoco Cadiz in 1978. Next slide, please. So basically, to sum up MARPOL, it's no oil, no plastics, no untreated sewage, no non-organic garbage should go into the sea. Next slide, please. So continuing with MARPOL, the rules are more stringent, tighter in coastal waters. Normally, we would consider coastal waters out to 12 miles, and special areas with high ship traffic, such as the Caribbean Sea, and environmentally sensitive areas such as Antarctica and the Arctic. Also, port cities are looking at air pollution by ships, especially in Alaska, California, and Scandinavia, where they're requiring ships to go on shore power. And you can think of, say, example of this as St. Thomas on a busy day. Okay, and then ballast water disposal is becoming an issue. It's been going on for over 100 years, but it's now becoming a big issue. Next slide, please. Okay, so the emission control areas, the ECA, this is a map of them. And what the ECA seeks to reduce is the amount of sulfur dioxide in the air. So it requires that the fuels have a minimum amount of sulfur, and which translates to more expensive fuels, but the industry has to comply with that. Next slide, please. Okay, so then the IMO Ballast Water Management Convention came into force on September 8th, 2017, and the ships must manage their ballast water and sediments according to a ship-specific plan. So each ship has to have a plan now. And most ships need to install onboard system to treat the ballast water and kill unwanted organisms. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a depiction of ballast water management. So in number one, the ship is loading ballast water in the port it's in. So it's offloaded its cargo, it's riding very high in the water, so that's not efficient for going to sea. So it takes on water from the harbor to bring it to the right proper level it needs to make the journey. And that water is taken from the harbor, and along with the water comes the critters that live in that harbor. Then the ship goes to where it's going with the ballast tanks, and when it gets to its destination port, it pumps the water off. So in the normal evolution, the critters that live in the Mediterranean never ever get to go to New York. But with ballast water, they can be picked up in Naples and dropped off in New York Harbor. And they might say, wow, we like it here. And what's even better, none of our natural enemies are here. and we can really multiply and take over the place. So that's why a lot of attention is being put on controlling ballast and making sure that the water is cleaned of any organisms before it's pumped over. If you don't do that, you can destroy the fisheries, you can destroy coral reefs and that by bringing in invasive species. Next slide, please. Okay, so compliance. Compliance with the regulations is enforced by the port states and harbor authorities. So when they inspect the ship and the ship doesn't meet the requirements, they can hold the ship in port. If the ship has been polluting in their waters and then comes into port, it can be held in port. Out to the 200 nautical mile limit, that compliance is enforced by Coast Guards and navies. Other compliance is enforced by the port state, not the port state, the state in which the ship is registered. So if you want to know which state is the ship registered in, look at the stern, the back of the ship. The flag that's flying from there is a flag under which the ship is registered. Next slide, please. Okay, so what's important for the Caribbean? I'd say probably MARPOL is probably one of the most important because of if you have a disaster with oil, it has an immediate impact on your tourism and then long-term impact on the tourism. When the oil washes up on the beaches and then over years, it can continue to wash up on the beaches. Others is safe navigation, so training and certification. And then others would be the security code, making sure that there's no terrorism incidents. Next slide, please. All right, thank you very much for your attention. I'll turn it over to Aida Escobar for questions and answers.
Well, before we do that, allow me, Andrew, to thank you for that incredible presentation. I feel I've gone through a master's degree on a course on regulations. I know it's a very complicated space and one that is absolutely critical and essential for the operations of the maritime industry. This is a space that is the controls that you spoke about, the IMO. These are global international agencies that oversee regulations and ensure that our waters are protected. With that, I'm now delighted to ask Aida to manage the Q&A, and there are many questions in the queue. So Aida, please. Laurette, is Aida available?
I think she has messaged and said that she was having some technical issues because of, unfortunately, relying on the internet when it's raining.
Oh, okay. Well,
that's
I
fine.
can see some.
I was about to say, so far, we have a question, Geneve. The question I've seen is the CMU is an ISO certified maritime training submission. I believe it's the only one that can. How important are ISO standards for maritime training? I think that's, I heard your presentation and I was like, wow, there's so much that can go wrong at sea. I thought it was so safe. So I'm seeing that there is importance in these standards and making sure people are aware. So I guess Denise is asking how important are ISO standards for maritime training, especially as it relates to our region?
Extremely important because ISO says that you meet international standards that are stringent, that not only do you have the knowledge, you demonstrate a proficiency with that. So it's not that easy to get ISO certification.
Could you, I believe, I'm sorry, I believe the Caribbean Maritime University is one of those institutions in the region that has this ISO training. Now, Andrew, you would know this. You lectured there for a little bit and speak to the quality of the education that certainly our kids who are on this part of the series can understand is available to them in the region.
Mm-hmm. I would say that I taught there a number of years back. I gave one of the masters a module in the master's course, and the education there is quite good. And I think, like I said, it isn't an easy thing to achieve ISO certification. So that's quite an accomplishment. And CMU should be congratulated on that.
Andrew, are you able to go through the questions yourself as you see them?
Yeah, okay, I see some. Okay, so it says, can you share some of the protocols that govern disease outbreak at sea in relation to access to port? Okay, when a ship comes into port, it has to clear what's called Customs, Immigration, and Quarantine, or CQI, depending on how the order you have it in. But the important thing is quarantine. So when a ship comes into port, if there's no disease on board, they say there's no contagious disease on board. If there is a contagious disease on board, then the port does not have to let anybody from the ship come ashore. Now, if it's a life-threatening issue, they may let the ill person be transferred to a hospital ashore, but the rest of the crew or passengers have to remain on the ship. So that's the main thing, that when a ship comes into port, they're going to declare that they don't have communicable diseases on board the ship, contagious diseases. So that's been an issue with the COVID with the passenger ships, the cruise ships, when they couldn't find a port where they could offload their passengers because they had COVID on board. And then there's a question, does the U.S. State Department play any role in Caribbean seaport security? Off the top of my head, I would say the State Department, working through our Homeland Security, setting worldwide security levels, would probably be in close cooperation with the Caribbean security officials, since that's international. The various governments cooperate with each other. And then it said, was it because of MARPOL why the anti-fouling paint on the ships are now organic? I think it was not so much MARPOL, but more environmental concern that the paints should not be toxic to organisms other than those that would want to attach themselves to the ship's hull. Again, anti-fouling paints, in other words, the paint beneath the waterline that prevents or discourages organisms like clams or other barnacles attaching themselves to the hull of the ship. So if you have a fuzzy ship, you have a slow ship, it burns a lot more fuel. So every so often, the paint has to be renewed. Every so often, divers have to go down with a machine and scrub the hull to clean the barnacles on that. Mm-hmm. And then, okay, someone said, yes, ballast water is how we now have lionfish in Jamaican water. Exactly.
Is that true? Is that true, Andrew? That's how, because lionfish is certainly a delicacy.
Yes, well, another area is the lamprey in the Great Lakes was through ballast water, and that devastated the Great Lakes fisheries.
Mm-hmm.
Professor Coggins, on that question, Hamilton here, on that question, what measures then are put in place by the ships to ensure that you are able to avoid, as you put it, sucking up these critters and transporting them from one location to the next?
Probably the most efficient one is to put heating coils into the ballast tanks and then you heat the water up to, say, 180 degrees Fahrenheit. You don't want it to be boiling, but you heat it up quite hot and for a period of time, and that should kill the organisms.
Okay. Thank you.
Another way is to chemically treat them, but then that's not as environmentally friendly.
Right. There's a question there, Professor Coggins, about piracy. Of course, we have the legends of Pirates of the Caribbean coming out of Port Royal, and much has been made of that in the entertainment world. And historically, is piracy a concern in the region at the moment?
I don't believe it's a concern that much at the moment in the Caribbean. Piracy is more issue, say, in the Red Sea, Arabian Sea area, or off the west coast of Africa, or off the east coast of Africa.
So why do you think it would not be an issue? What is it just, what is it that's protecting us from that kind of?
I would think the work of the navies or coast guards.
Mm-hmm. I see. So it's a very robust group of people throughout the region that's really protecting.
Right, and then the area that, how close you have to steam to shore. Like there's piracy issues in Malacca Straits,
Mm-hmm.
but when you're going through Malacca Straits, you're going through a narrow band of water, and you're going through it for a day, 2 days, and you're moving relatively slow. So then you make an easy target for someone to dash out from one of the coves on the side with a boat and board the ship.
Well, I'm glad to hear piracy isn't, but certainly drug trafficking is. And
Yes.
the region is one of the biggest transshipment areas for drug trafficking. Why is that, and why are we so particularly vulnerable, and how are we managing that?
I would say the market. The market is in North America, in the United States.
So the security protocols that would, for example, prohibit or protect us from piracy don't seem to be doing the same job.
Well, I would say probably the drug traffic is more lucrative than piracy.
Mm-hmm.
Could I also add something, if that's possible? Chevanev Charles from St. Vincent. Can you hear me? Okay. So from my understanding of piracy, I believe piracy can only occur on the high seas, if I'm not mistaken, based on the definition. I think it's 111 or 110 in the UNCLOS. Mm-hmm. And that tends to skew the statistics. Okay. that one would say piracy is happening, because you can actually have the same set of events happening, but because it's closer to shore, it will then be considered armed robbery and not piracy at all. I did have a question. When you said the work of the Navy, are there any collaborative efforts between the U.S. Coast Guard and any countries in the Caribbean that you know of?
I would imagine so, but I can't say for sure. I'm just thinking of the Coast Guard's mission, especially in suppression of drug trafficking. Mm-hmm. So there would be some cooperation, a degree of cooperation.
Yeah, I think in the drug, of course, I'm not an expert on this area, but I remember during my tenure as Consul General for Jamaica, several white papers came across my desk, and that's why I posed the question, because I know there was a role for Homeland Security and the U.S. State Department in this whole protection of our region with respect, in particular, to drugs transshipment. So that's a whole other area, I guess, separate and apart in a way from just the IMO regulations that govern environmental issues.
Andrew, there is a question from Sofan Castle. If ISO certification is important for maritime training institutions, where does the STCW code stand as that specifically deals with maritime training?
Okay, the STCW is something different than ISO. ISO looks at different areas. So ISO looks at the management of the training. And STCW looks at the licensing. It tests the proficiency.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. Another question that I see in the chat. Are there from Alisa Gobinsingh? Alisa, do you want to turn your mic on and ask your question live?
No problem. Good morning, everyone.
Go ahead, Alisa.
My question was basically if there are any regulations that were developed with the smuggling of illegal goods, and I'm not necessarily speaking about drugs alone, but like illegal goods, like for example, a simple example might be like Cuban cigars or like goods that harm animals in the process, you know, so it might be illegal in certain countries. Is it an issue of corruption among like ship companies or anything like that? And are there any regulations?
Well, I would think those are mostly national regulations with regards to smuggling.
Mm-hmm.
I don't recall. Well, I'm not familiar with international maritime regulations regarding smuggling. I think those are mostly between countries or under the national law.
I see. And I guess part of Ms. Singh's, Golda Singh's question would also be human trafficking.
Yeah.
Which goes via ship, not so much air, but by ship. Is that part of the regulations that would fall under what we've been talking about today, or is that again country to country?
I think that would be country to country, and then yeah, it would be country to country, and then the port state itself, because if you were smuggling people into a country, you would not be making truthful declarations on your before you entered.
So that's a customs issue, which is separate and apart. Yeah, I understand.
Thank you. Is there sufficient? There's another question in the chat. Is there sufficient legislation in the Caribbean to adequately regulate and monitor the maritime industry?
Oh, I really wouldn't be able to answer that. I would imagine that there's, under the IMO conventions, that if those are strictly enforced, that you can keep the industry well regulated.
So the follow-up to that, Andrew, which I see in the chat also, is where is the Caribbean with respect to that compliance on a scale of 1 to 10? I know some countries are in compliance and some are not.
I would say, oh, gee, I really can't answer that one. Sorry.
All right.
I'm not seeing any hands raised, and I'm not seeing any other questions coming up. Genevieve, so as moderator, the decision is yours.
All right. Well, I think, as I said, I feel we all have been through a master's course. This is very technical information and very detailed, and you've done a masterful job in laying out some very complicated information for us on a layman's level so that we can wrap our non-maritime, so to speak, brain around all of this information. Your students at PACE are very lucky to have you, and we certainly are, Andrew, lucky to have you serving on the ACMF board. Before I ask Nomar to provide the vote of thanks, let me thank you very much again, Andrew, and also remind our participants to please register for the next session. Your attendance here does not automatically mean that you're registered for the next session. One last reminder, there is the ACMF Cantor Scholarship. Applications need to be in, I would say, certainly by the end of this week. Hamilton, can you remind me of the date, the deadline for the scholarship application? I think it's the 16th to get them in so that we can award a full tuition scholarship to a deserving student. Without further ado, thank you so very much. And Nomar, would you please move the vote of thanks?
Captain Andrew, I concur
with Dr. Genevieve in that I do feel like I was in a master's program at the University of the West Indies. I was listening to your disposition. I was like, wow. I'm truly enlightened, and I'm certain everyone is enlightened on the steps and the measures that are taken to actually protect the environment and the product that we have here in the Caribbean. And so on behalf of all the participants in this group, I want to say a heartfelt thanks for taking the time, your detailed time to explain and break down all of those things that you did just now. It was not lost on us, and we're truly grateful. Looking forward to more sessions like this that will help to enlighten the general population in the Caribbean, and just the safety measures and standards that are there to really protect the product, the wonderful product we have in this region. So once again, on behalf of everyone and ACMF, thank you so very much.
Thank you. You're welcome.
We'll see you all at the next session on October 21st, being led by Juan Carlos Costin, President of the Caribbean Shipping Association, and he will lead the final session, Gangway to the World, Caribbean Maritime Training, Technology, and Opportunities for Our Youth. Thank you all. God bless. Stay safe.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Can I ask the members of the planning team to stay on when everybody else leaves? So Damon.
Okay.
Just want to have a quick get together. Thanks for that. Damon, you might need to help some people leave because we don't want to spend too much time.
I'm just going to open my office door.
Yes, Vanessa, you should stay, Vanessa. Thank you. Okay, so colleagues who are not members of the planning team, thanks for coming. See you at the next session, which is planned for the 21st of October. Thanks for coming, everybody. Okay, Cappy, Stefan Antwine, Felicia Gordon, Bristol Thompson, you can leave now. Thanks for coming. Irwin Jamiona, Serena Lawrence, Joren Sam, Quincy Overam, Zanal, Leo Brewster. Thanks for coming. You can leave now. Okay, so Damon, some persons are not leaving. So can you help them leave, please? So we can just do a quick catch up with the planning team. Damon, are you there?
Hey, Laurette, one moment. Working on it now. One moment.
Cheers. Thanks for your patience, colleagues. As soon as the last person who's not a member of the planning team is out of the room,
Those were good questions.
yeah, they were. Damon, you can also stop recording because it's still recording.